Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
How innocent the low-flying biplane appeared on that sunny June morning until it cast poisonous spray onto the wind. Mission Evolution Radio TV show is coming to you around the world on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. With us this hour to examine how commonly used toxic chemicals are impacting our health is Dr. Stephanie Seneff. Dr. Seneff is a senior research scientist at MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She has a BS degree from MIT in biology and MSEE and PhD degrees from MIT in electrical engineering and computer science. Her recent interests have focused on the role of toxic chemicals and micronutrient deficiencies in health and disease, with a special emphasis on the pervasive herbicide glyphosate and the mineral sulfur. Since 2008, she's authored over 40 peer-reviewed journal papers on these topics. She is the author of a book on glyphosate entitled The Toxic Legacy: How the Weedkiller Glyphosate is Destroying Our Health and Environment. Her website, stephanieseneff.net. Dr. Seneff, thanks so much for coming on Mission Evolution.
So great to be here. Thank you for having me.
So your educational background is pretty impressive, but how did you get into toxic chemicals from there?
I got interested in autism, and that's what really brought me to all of this. I was watching the rates of autism go up and up every year. Over the period from 2000 to 2007, 2008, I started to think there's something going on here. Every year more, oh, we're just diagnosing it more. Don't worry about it. I didn't think so. So I wanted to get to the bottom of it. I wanted to figure out what was causing this epidemic, because I could see that if it kept going up the way it was, we would be in huge trouble soon. And so anyway, I just started looking at all the different possibilities and came upon glyphosate. And I really believe now that it is, I would say it's the primary cause of the epidemic, not the only thing that causes autism, but the primary cause of the epidemic.
How does glyphosate and autism relate? What's the mechanism there that's causing the glyphosate to increase the chances of autism?
So that's a big, long story. And I just published a paper together with colleagues linking glyphosate to autism through detailed metabolic processes that go awry when the child is chronically exposed to glyphosate. It has to do centrally with the gut microbiome, actually. Glyphosate starts by messing up the balance of the gut microbes, particularly injuring, more greatly causing damage to the beneficial bacteria, allowing the pathogens to overgrow, and they're disrupting a whole bunch of things that have to do with all the things that gut microbes do for the host. It's amazing how talented those microbes are and how much they do for the host. And when they can't do that anymore, you start to get all kinds of diseases, not just autism.
Yes, there's been a lot of work done recently on the gut microbiome and how important it is and how underrated it is and how the inflammation that starts in the gut affects the entire body, isn't there?
That's right. Yes. And, we didn't know much about the gut microbiome back in just even 30, 40 years ago. There were very few papers on it. It was working fine and we didn't see any problems. So we didn't realize all the things it was doing. Once the gut microbiome can no longer do its job, you start to see all these issues that are coming up, all these chronic diseases. And then when you look deeply, you find out that the microbes are behind these diseases, that there's these imbalances that show up in association with, for example, Parkinson's disease is also directly related to gut dysbiosis, and also probably Alzheimer's and even many cancers, I suspect. So they really matter. They need to be healthy. And when they're not healthy, you're not healthy, systemically, really.
Is inflammation play a big role in this?
Absolutely. Inflammation is central. I think it's central to Alzheimer's and to autism and, to cancer and many, many other diseases that we're seeing. Absolutely the case.
And then, of course, that inflammation starts in the gut and then spreads throughout the body.
That's right.
So does the brain get inflamed? Is that what causes
Absolutely.
our
Yes.
autism?
Yes, in fact, one of the early papers I wrote on autism, before I even knew about glyphosate, I talked about chronic low-grade inflammation in the brain, which interestingly kind of causes the neurons to shut down. And I think it's a protective response that by reducing the neurons' activities, you reduce the damage that's going to come about because of, for example, the mitochondria. When they get sick, they start releasing reactive oxygen species, which then damage the neurons. And so the neurons have to make very astute cut back on their use of the mitochondria, which means they don't have enough energy, which means they can't do what they normally do well.
So for those of us without a background in biology, what are the mitochondria?
Right, yeah, because they're central to the story, and I do talk about that, of course, in the paper as well that I just published. The mitochondria are the energy-producing organelles inside the cell. Neurons and muscle cells have lots and lots of mitochondria, and so they're more sensitive to mitochondrial damage. But the mitochondria, I think, systemically get damaged by glyphosate through interesting mechanisms that we can get into later, and by many other chemicals as well. Mitochondrial dysfunction is a factor in many neurodegenerative diseases and neurodevelopmental diseases and cancer and all kinds of other rheumatoid arthritis. All of these things, many of them can be traced back to mitochondrial dysfunction, which I think is a consequence of chronic glyphosate poisoning.
Can we turn that around?
Yes, well, the way to turn it around is to get rid of the glyphosate, and that's very hard to do.
Yeah, good luck with that.
It's everywhere in the environment, especially in the United States, for example. I think the United States and Brazil are kind of competing for first place as far as how much glyphosate is used per person in that country. Both of those countries are very big on glyphosate. We depend upon it for our food supply because we have all these GMO Roundup ready crops, GMO glyphosate resistant crops.
So let's start with how does it get here in the first place? How does it get into our environment and into our systems?
Well, certainly through the food system, because as I mentioned, there are all these crops that have been engineered to resist glyphosate. They've got a bacterial gene that's inserted through GMO technology into their genome, which allows them to produce a version of an enzyme that is resistant, that it isn't harmed by glyphosate. And that enzyme is called EPSP synthase. It's in a biological pathway called the shikimate pathway. And that pathway doesn't exist in human cells. So this is why they argue that it's safe for us. It's a wonderful chemical because it kills all plants except for those that have been engineered to resist it. But it doesn't harm us at all. This is the argument that they give, which is not true. And you can read my book to see exactly why it's not true. But
so the making the plant, genetically engineering it to be resistant to glyphosate, in effect, makes it so that you can douse the thing in glyphosate and it'll kill all the weeds, but it won't kill the crop. Is that
that's
the point
exactly
there?
right. And it makes farming very efficient because you don't have to have people pull the weeds by hand. It's hard to separately kill the weeds without a lot of manual labor, unless you have a chemical that the plant is protected from. But the other thing they use it for, which actually ends up showing up more at higher levels in the food supply, is the non-GMO crops. People think if I buy non-GMO, I'll be safe. That's not true, because there are many non-GMO crops that are sprayed with glyphosate right before the harvest as a desiccant. And that's become a very popular practice in farming. And they intentionally are killing the plant. It's ready for the harvest. They accelerate the going to seed so they can harvest it sooner. Sometimes they're racing against a frost.
Mhm.
It's getting late in Canada, and the crop's going to get killed by the frost unless we harvest it. We can accelerate that by putting glyphosate on the crop, kill the crop, synchronize the yield, synchronize them to all go to seed at the same time because they go to seed in response to the glyphosate, and that increases the yield as well. And so it also dries out the crop, which makes it easier to clear it for next year's growth, and also kills any weeds at the same time. So you get a head start on next year's weeds as well. So they seem to think there's a lot of good reasons to do that. But the problem is that glyphosate shows up in the foods that are derived from those crops at extremely high levels. And in fact, my friend Tony Mitra harassed the Canadian government for many years and finally got them to test over 8,000 different food samples for glyphosate. It was really a great thing that Canada did, because the other countries, US hardly tests anything. We just say, well, it's safe. We don't need to know. We know it's all over the food supply. We don't care, is what the US says. But they found the highest levels consistently were found in surprising place, which is legumes like peas, chickpeas, garbanzo beans, lentils, sky high levels of glyphosate in those foods. That's like hummus. And a lot of people who are gluten intolerant switch over to eating a lot of those foods. So they're going from the fire, what do you call it?
Out of the frying pan into the fire.
Out of the frying pan into the fire, because it's even higher levels of glyphosate typically in those legumes than there is in the wheat. The wheat also is sprayed right before harvest, and I think that is a primary cause of the epidemic we're seeing in gluten intolerance. And of course, also casein intolerance. Both of those, I think, are connected to glyphosate.
So we're just about out of time in this segment, but I take it that glyphosate isn't something you can just kind of wash off your apple.
No, it's embedded in the tissues, and we can get into that in the next segment, but that is really a critical part of it. You cannot wash it off. And it's even in the, in the animals, because the animals pick it up in their feed and it gets into their tissues. So
it stays. What's the half-life of the thing?
Yeah, well, that's a bigger story than we probably have time for if we're about to disappear, but it's supposed to be very fast. It's supposed to go away in a couple of weeks, according to Monsanto, but it actually can linger for a very long time, and it can get into the tissues, and then it gets extremely hard to get it out.
So it can kind of sit in there as a toxin in the fat, and there you have it.
Yeah, all over the body, actually, in the protein.
Oh, in the protein as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's very invasive, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, it is time for that station break. Dr. Seneff and I will return very shortly, so don't go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. What aren't they telling us? What we don't know may be hurting us. With us this hour, discussing the poisoning of the masses, is author of Toxic Legacy, How the Weedkiller Glyphosate is Destroying Our Health and Environment, Dr. Stephanie Seneff. Dr. Stephanie, I'd like to revisit something that we kind of opened up in the last segment. And you said that you correlated glyphosate poisoning, if you will, with food allergies, acquired food allergies. Would you go into that a little bit more? How does that happen?
Yes, well, it's a complicated story, of course. Everything about glyphosate is complicated metabolically, but it's extremely interesting. And again, it starts with the gut microbes, because the gut microbes have a responsibility for helping the host to digest certain foods, and in particular foods that are high in proline. Proline is an amino acid that's found in proteins, and both gluten and casein have a lot of proline. Their characteristic feature of them is they have a lot of proline, and the particular microbes in the gut, lactobacillus in particular, produce a lot of enzymes that help to break the proline apart from the other amino acids, because it's an unusual protein that is difficult to break apart. It needs specialized services that the microbes provide. So the microbes get those two, lactobacillus and bifidobacteria, are very important in the infant gut. They're like the dominant species normally in the infant gut. Glyphosate kills both of them. They're both very sensitive to glyphosate compared to other microbes. So then when they become suppressed, then the other microbes grow, and then you have a complete imbalance. And the microbes, and even those enzymes that the microbes use to help the host get disrupted, get suppressed by glyphosate. And
so say for instance, candida is a big buzzword right now, the overgrowth of candida. I know it's naturally occurring, but it doesn't do what the other microbiomes do, but it puts out a lot of toxins. Is that correct?
Candida is very interesting, yes, and it does overgrow. And in part, I think that's because the bacteria are being killed off. So the yeast are natural in the gut, but when you get too much yeast, they can actually, what they do is they metabolize glucose, sugar, and they turn it into alcohol, ethanol. It's very, very interesting. And there's a syndrome, autobrewery syndrome. It's a lovely name, autobrewery syndrome. And you can be a person who doesn't drink any alcohol, but you eat a lot of sugar, and you can get really drunk from the alcohol that your yeast overgrowth are producing in your gut. And I think a lot of brain fog type of thing could be due to ethanol being produced by the yeast that have overgrown because the bacteria are being killed off. And I think that's really an interesting idea that could be something that's going on with glyphosate as well.
Could that also cause an alcohol addiction?
Absolutely. I mean, you can even get poisoned by the ethanol. It's the same ethanol that's being produced by the yeast as what you drink. And so you're being poisoned by ethanol when you have a massive overgrowth of yeast that are busy fermenting the sugar and turning it into alcohol.
Okay, so we have overgrowth of yeast. It's not doing the job that the microbiome did. Microbiome has been killed off, so nobody's there doing its job. So the food isn't getting totally digested. Does the
Right.
undigested particles get into the bloodstream? Is that what
That's
causes?
exactly right. And I didn't finish that story, but because those
Yeah.
gluten and casein peptides don't get broken down, you end up with these short peptides that have proline in them because they're stuck, right? They can't be broken down. First of all, you aren't able to use those as nutrients because we need to get our protein. Our amino acids are supplied by the proteins that we eat, and they have all kinds of aminos for sale at the health food store, right? You see all these different choices of different kinds of amino acids and even a big jar of aminos. That's basically pre-digested food. And I think because we're not able to get the amino acids out of the proteins that we're eating, we become deficient in amino acids. And at the same time, we have these peptides that are undigested, and they become, the immune cells are very sensitive to those because they see them as foreign peptides. They don't show up in human proteins. And our immune system has been trained to recognize proteins that are foreign and then to react to them by developing antibodies. And then those antibodies can actually attack your own proteins through a process called molecular mimicry, where you can get thyroid issues because of the thyroid being attacked by antibodies that were produced by as a response to those peptides in the gluten that didn't get digested. And so that's how you get, celiac disease. And I think that's going up exactly in step with the use of glyphosate on wheat. I actually did a paper on that. And it's interesting because it matches wheat much better than it does corn and soy, which are the big crops that you usually talk about. Glyphosate's used on wheat as a desiccant right before harvest. So it shows up in the wheat-based products, the cookies, the crackers, the bread, they all have glyphosate in them.
Does there come a point when it's like guilt by association? You might eat some perfectly good wheat, but the immune system has already identified it as an enemy.
Yeah, I think so. Because once you have those antibodies, even if you start eating organic all the time, so you reduce your glyphosate exposure, I would hope that you might be able to eat wheat again. It might recover, but it's not clear because you have those antibodies and they can continue to react to because they've been trained already. They're there. And so how do you get rid of them? I would think it would get better because if they don't see continual, if those peptides disappear because you're no longer getting exposed chronically to glyphosate, the antibodies ought to sort of die down with time. And one could hope that you might actually be able to go back and eat wheat again. I don't know.
We can sure hope. We can sure hope. I know that personally, when I'm traveling to Canada or Europe, I can eat the bread. But in
I
America,
have heard
no
that so many
way.
times. So many
Yeah.
people have told me that
Mhm.
in Europe is much better. And that's the thing that Canada showed up. Canada did a big test where they measured all kinds of different foods for glyphosate, 8,000 different samples of foods, Canadian foods, imports from the US, from Mexico, and from Europe. And there was a consistent pattern that the imports from Europe generally had lower levels of glyphosate than Canada and the US. And Mexico came in right in line with Europe. So it's interesting that Mexico does a lot better. I'm proud of Mexico because they've been really trying to ban glyphosate. And we've been pushing back. Our country has been trying to discourage them from banning glyphosate, which is very frustrating for me. But it would be wonderful if Mexico could show us an example, our next door neighbor, to actually get rid of glyphosate and sort of prove that they can do it. And then hopefully we might actually start to think that maybe we should be doing something similar as well, because we have one of the highest autism rates in the world, and it correlates with our use of glyphosate, extensive use of glyphosate on our crops.
So if we were to stop using glyphosate, how long would it take the soil to recover to where we're getting clean food again?
Good question. And it's a complicated answer because it depends on the soil type. And I've studied different soil types have different degrees of willingness to break down the glyphosate. It depends on what's in the soil. That sometimes it can get chelated. The glyphosate can get trapped in places where the microbes can't get to it, or there might not be enough of the kinds of microbes that can break it down. It actually only a very few species are able to break down glyphosate. That's part of its demonic behavior, because it has this CP bond. It's called a carbon phosphorus bond that's quite unusual in nature. And most species don't have the enzyme that can break that bond.
Well, has our soil also become depleted of the very enzymes and things that are supposed to be breaking it down?
Well, yes, in fact, the microbes are being killed in the soil just as they are in the gut. It's a similar problem. And in a sense, the soil is the plant's gut. They have a microbiome from the soil that they use extensively to help them, import minerals. And so Don Huber was the one who first introduced me to glyphosate. And he has shown experimentally that the minerals are way down in the crops that are grown with glyphosate exposure, because the minerals get trapped by the glyphosate. And then the microbes can't get to them. And then they aren't taken up properly by the cell. Particularly sulfur was way down, which I found interesting because as you mentioned, sulfur is my thing. And I believe that sulfur deficiency is a very big problem today. We don't get enough sulfur in our diet. And we also, our enzymes that manage sulfur are defective because of glyphosate exposure. And I talk extensively about that in my book. It's very much connected to autism.
So it sounds like we have an empty harvest. So not only is glyphosate making us unable to digest, but it's also depleting our crops.
Depleting the nutrients in our crops and including the nitrogen uptake. That's another problem because the nitrogen fixing bacteria are getting disrupted by glyphosate. So the plants can't take up nitrogen as efficiently as they would be if the glyphosate weren't there. And as a consequence, you have to use more nitrate fertilizers, which then wash off with the rain, get into the waterways, and then they cause this kind of nutrient excess that ends up producing cyanide, all this poisoning from the cyanobacteria that overgrow in the presence of too much nutrition, too many nutrients, not nitrogen and phosphorus, nutrients showing up in the waterways that encourage the overgrowth of these blue-green algae. They're called cyanobacteria, and that then causes a whole bunch of problems with the red tide and that sort of thing.
It's one big modern mess, isn't it?
I would say so.
We're about out of time in this segment, but when was glyphosate introduced? How long has it been with us?
It was patented as an herbicide around in the early 1970s, and I think it was first introduced on the market in the United States in 1974. So it has been around for many decades. It really didn't start accelerating. The use went way up around the turn of the century once they introduced the GMO glyphosate-resistant crops, and that caused a big increase. And it started going up exponentially over that whole period. From starting at 2000, I've been tracking the rise in glyphosate. You can get the data on the web from the government for the usage on corn and soy crops. And you can correlate that with a rise in a huge list of different diseases that are going up dramatically in step with the rise in glyphosate usage on core crops.
And we even are, I say, well, eat meat, but if they've been eating corn that's been treated
it's in the
with
meat.
glyphosate,
Yes.
then it's in the animal.
Yes.
You aren't what you eat, you are what you ate.
You are what you eat. That's a good one. I like
I got
that.
that from Dr. Gundry.
That's good. That's really good.
Yeah. So like I said, we're about out of time in this segment, but when I get back, I'd like to look at other ways that this glyphosate is sneaking into our systems and into our homes. So that would be a really interesting thing to try to shortstop, but knowledge is the key, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Seneff and I will be right back to continue our discussion. Please stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org, and we're coming to you on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. If it's killing us, why do we keep doing it? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us discussing the negative impact of glyphosate on our health and environment is Dr. Stephanie Seneff. Her website, stephanieseneff.net. Dr. Stephanie, before we went into the break, we were talking about trying to figure out other ways outside of just on our food that glyphosate is getting into our homes and impacting our families. Would you go into that for us, please?
Well, unfortunately, it's in the air, it's in the rain, it's in the waterways, it's in the, I think it's in the gasoline, and in the biofuels that go into the gasoline, for example, the ethanol. I worry about that in particular because I think that's one that we haven't really heard about, and it hasn't been proven, but I suspect it, and this one has me concerned. My friend Anthony Samsa, we collaborated on a number of papers, and he asked different of his friends to collect rain samples from various places, and I gave him a sample from Cambridge, where I work at MIT, Cambridge, Massachusetts. I got another sample from my home in Winchester, which is a northern suburb of Cambridge. And then I got a third sample in Hawaii. I have a home in Hawaii, Kauai, North Shore, a very healthy area, and I got a rain sample from there. The two suburban rain samples came out negative, but the one from Cambridge had glyphosate in it in the test that he gave on that. And I was suspecting this because of the biofuels. Because when you think about, go ahead.
So it goes, I was wondering how what the fuels have to do with it, but you burn the fuels, it goes into the air, the rain comes through the air and collects the glyphosate?
It ends up in the air. I think you're breathing glyphosate in the air, especially if you're living near a major highway and there's a lot of trucks going around with biodiesel. There's also bioethanol. The U.S. is big on ethanol. We dilute our gasoline with 5%, even 10% ethanol. I think they're pushing towards 10% now. Ethanol in the gasoline. That ethanol comes from GMO glyphosate-resistant corn. Is the source of that ethanol, and so I would be very surprised if you didn't find glyphosate in that ethanol that goes into the biofuels. And then you're going to have really, even if you're just putting the gas in the gas tank and it's evaporating, it's a hot day, the glyphosate could easily be taken up into the air, I think, from that situation. It needs to be proven. It's just a theory that I have, but it makes me, and especially because I've seen that kids who live near highways actually are at increased risk to glyphosate compared to children that live in a more remote area.
Depending on where that remote area is, if it's next to a cornfield, you might be in trouble.
That is true.
Yeah. So how about topical exposure? Very often I'll be on a walk on a bike trail, and you'll see these little signs that says, "Oh, just been sprayed." They don't tell you what you're supposed to do about that, but your dog goes over to take care of his business and gets it on his paws, or you walk across it, you get it on your shoes, that tracks into the house.
Yes, no, that's a good point.
How much of an impact would that have on babies crawling on the floor, pets walking across it being stirred up to breathe?
I know. I mean, that's a question. It's just that it's so pervasively used here in this country. People use it on their lawns very casually. I think people are so unaware of its risk factor that they would be happy to put glyphosate on their dandelions while the child's playing outside. I think some people might not think about that. You just not realize, and certainly not wear any protective gear when they're using it because we've been told it's so safe. That's actually, I think, a very dangerous aspect of it, that we believe it's safe and therefore we use it casually in our home environments. And there have been several lawsuits against the company that makes glyphosate that have been successfully done through jury trial and had big awards for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And all of those lawsuits involved people using glyphosate on land. Often it was their own yard, for example. There was a school groundskeeper who was the first one who got, his name is Dwayne Lee Johnson, and he got a big reward from a jury trial for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma because of exposure on his skin, because when he was using it, he had some issues with his applicator and he spilled it on his skin. And I think that it can be absorbed through the skin if you actually work with it and so close up.
So just by the nature of the thing, it absorbs very easily, doesn't it? I mean, wouldn't it have to be effective?
It does.
On the crops?
Does. Yes. In fact, there was a woman who worked in China in the glyphosate plant where they make glyphosate, they manufacture it, and she developed Parkinson's disease at a very young age, which was in the paper was written about her, linking that to the glyphosate exposure through her job manufacturing it.
And I've heard of that link between Parkinson's and glyphosate. I mean, crop dusters, young people come down with it like crazy. There's lots of examples of people that work around it a lot that end up with Parkinson's and similar things. So I've seen the correlation, and I'm by no means a scientist. Why, with all this evidence, is it still being passed out like popcorn?
I don't know. I really feel discouraged. I've tried so hard. In fact, a group of us went to the government and met in Washington, D.C. on our own nickel. We didn't have any support for it. And we were all passionate about glyphosate being much more toxic than we realized. And we presented our materials to the EPA. And it was a very strange experience because they delayed the meeting and then they spent time talking. They basically used up most of the time. And then we had to really rush through our presentation. And while we were presenting, they were pretty much ignoring us in a way. I mean, it was a very weird experience. I think they were not happy to see us and they didn't want to hear what we had to say, and nothing came of it. And we were just really frustrated.
I can only imagine. And isn't part of the problem that the doggone stuff works so well at what it's supposed to do?
The government seems to think that we can't live without it, which I find really amusing because, for all but the last 40 years of human existence, we lived without it, right? We somehow managed. So how can we not, how can it possibly be essential? But that's the line they give. It does reduce the number of people that have to be put into growing our food. So it does free up people to do other things. It's sort of the Industrial Revolution, and then this whole development of the computer technology and all of this has happened with people working in jobs that are not pulling weeds in the farms. So we have many, many fewer farmers now. Agriculture is a much smaller proportion of the work that happens in this country because of this convenience of all these chemicals. It's not just glyphosate, because we have herbicides and other herbicides and insecticides and fungicides. We throw all that stuff on our crops, and so they become really toxic. I just can't understand how anybody can think that it's okay to put poisons all over the crops that are providing the food that you're going to put in your mouth. I just don't even comprehend how that can be thought of as something perfectly fine to do.
Well, I've heard one of the arguments, well, because of the GMOs and the glyphosates, we're now able to produce way more and feed the masses. But if it's poisoning us and we aren't absorbing the nutrients we're getting because of it, seems like that's kind of a losing battle, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's not feeding the masses with healthy food, because you've got all those minerals being lost. So we have a lot of problems with mineral deficiencies. And minerals are very, very important because so many enzymes depend critically upon iron and zinc and manganese and magnesium, all these minerals that we just need in small amounts, but we really need them for our enzymes to work properly. And we have a lot of people who have issues because of mineral deficiencies that are caused by glyphosate, because it's really good chelator. So it grabs hold of those minerals and won't let go.
So does it have a missing proton or electron or something where it scoops up anything close to it?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting molecule, as I said. It's got, it's negatively charged. It's a Zwitter ion. It has both plus and minus. It has very interesting biophysical properties that make it able to grab hold of minerals. Anything like, for example, even aluminum. It'll 2 glyphosate molecules will wrap around an aluminum ion, which is normally +3 charge, and the 2 glyphosates are negatively charged, so they end up erasing the charge, and they produce a small organic molecule that's not organic, meaning and not the organic that says it's without glyphosate, but a small molecule that's able to get past the gut barrier, because it's neutral charge. And I believe, I've written about this. I really theorize that aluminum in your food, because we have a problem with aluminum in our food, and normally it stays in the gut. The gut keeps it out, but because glyphosate sets up a leaky gut barrier, and then it binds to the aluminum and hides its +3 charge, it creates a small molecule that's not charged that easily goes across that barrier that it has caused leaks in. So it ends up circulating, going up to the brain, particularly getting to the pineal gland, which is outside of the blood-brain barrier, and damaging the pineal gland. And the pineal gland is a really important organ in our body that controls, for example, sleep.
Isn't aluminum also linked with Alzheimer's?
Absolutely the case. Yes.
So we're setting ourselves up for increases in Alzheimer's along with everything else.
Yes. And I think aluminum is linked to autism as well. And in fact, I think autism and Alzheimer's have a lot in common. It's quite interesting. Yeah, they're kind of a similar disease, except different age groups. So they have different developmental phases of life, and so they behave. It has many overlapping characteristics, actually.
Very interesting. Is MS and all those autoimmune, are they also related in the same way?
Not the same way, but they're related. And I think it has to do with these, with what I discussed before about the proteins not getting properly digested and then causing autoimmune disease because of the immune cells mistaking the human protein. It sort of matches the one they learned to watch out for. So they bind the human protein instead, and then they mess up its workings.
So you're saying that the thyroid is very much impacted by
Yes,
this.
yes.
Like Hashimoto's disease.
Exactly. Yes. Autoimmune thyroid disease, and that's directly connected to gluten intolerance. In fact, the celiac disease. Sorry, celiac disease has a characteristic dysfunction of the thyroid that's linked to it.
It's just amazing. Well, it's time for us to take another station break. On the other side, we'll continue our very important discussion with Dr. Seneff. We will explore the impact of commonly used toxic chemicals. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Are we doomed? Is resistance futile? This is Mission Evolution, evolution.org. Dr. Stephanie Seneff and I are exploring how to mitigate the toxic effect of glyphosate. Her website is stephanieseneff.net. Stephanie, we've been talking doom and gloom here.
Yes.
And it's a pretty frightening, eye-opening experience when you realize how toxic our environment is becoming due to our practices. Are we doomed? Is there a way to turn this around in time?
There is, and I'm hopeful because I'm seeing more and more organic choices showing up at the grocery stores, even the common grocery stores, not the specialty stores. But I really encourage anybody listening to really make an effort to only buy certified organic food when you shop at the grocery store. And it's becoming more and more available over time. And as I said, I mean, I can pick up a lot of organics at the local general supermarket. These days, it's much easier to get almost everything you would need for cooking organic. And I think that's really the most important thing you can do to keep your family healthy, is to only buy certified organic, or to work with a farmer that you trust who's not using chemicals and buy directly from the farm. I think that's really important.
The argument against organic is it's expensive. But again, from what we've been saying, if you're eating non-organic, you're not really getting the nutrients that you should be anyway, right?
Right. It's not nearly as good quality food, even irrespective of the poison that's in it. And the poison, of course, is going to make you sick, and then you're going to have a lot of medical bills, and medical bills add up very quickly. So, and of course, you don't feel good either. So that's another thing to consider. If you want to feel healthy and strong and have a good brain that you're able to think well, you need to eat healthy food. And it's not just a matter of organic. I really encourage you to think in terms of growing, cooking, work in the kitchen, buy basic ingredients, don't buy processed foods. Pretty much avoid anything in a box.
Why is that?
So the processed foods first of all, the processing itself introduces more toxic chemicals into the mix. And of course, when it's highly processed, it's not nearly as nutritious, because all of these really interesting macromolecules that are produced by plants, for example, so when you eat a lot of fresh vegetables and fruits, you're getting all kinds of exotic molecules that have like polyphenols and flavonoids. Those things have very useful metabolic roles to play to help your mitochondria to work well. And even something like chlorophyll and even cholesterol. People think cholesterol is bad. They try to eat a low cholesterol diet. No, cholesterol is a very important nutrient that your body needs. It really, I think cholesterol is to animals as chlorophyll is to plants. And yeah, I think it's a very important nutrient that you need to make sure you have enough of it. And that, of course, means a high fat diet. I encourage people to eat a lot of fats and to go low on the carbs compared to the fats, and especially to eat whole foods as opposed to processed foods, which is like pure sugar and even starch. All of these basic, they take the foods and they turn them into pseudo foods with these processing plants, and then they produce a soy protein bar, which to me is really not a food. You look at the list of ingredients on a soy protein bar, I would never eat one of those.
Well, it became real popular to feel like a great cook by buying the canned stuff, reading the recipe off the back, and making fake food out of fake food, right? That was very prevalent in my mother's day.
Yeah, they were pushing that. They really were. I remember back when I was a child, the ads that would say, have you playing with the children in the living room while their TV dinners are cooking in the oven, and encourage you to think in terms of, you're better than that. You shouldn't have to waste time cooking. There are much better things you could be doing. Yeah. And we've gotten that message, I think, for sure in the United States, that cooking is kind of wasting time, and as efficient as you can possibly be to get that dinner on the table is beneficial. And I think we need to change that.
So I've got a question for you here. Go figure. What is deuterium?
Yeah, okay. I'm glad you brought that up. I'm quite obsessed with deuterium these days. I'm very excited about it. And I do think it's a central part of the story in metabolism. And then again, the glyphosate disrupts the deuterium homeostasis in the body. And so we have a lot of issues with too much deuterium in our mitochondria because of glyphosate. This is a story that I'm building, and I'm very excited about it. Deuterium is heavy hydrogen. Hydrogen is the most common atom in the universe. It's the upper left corner of the periodic chart. 1 proton, 1 electron, very tiny atom. And by far the most common atom in your body, like over 60% of the atoms in your body are hydrogen atoms. And hydrogen plays a tremendous role in all the reactions that take place with the enzymes. The enzymes catalyze all these reactions that involve moving hydrogen around. And so deuterium is heavy hydrogen. It has an extra neutron, which makes it twice as heavy. So it's very different in its behavior biophysically and biochemically compared to hydrogen, but it goes everywhere hydrogen goes, and it's a natural element. So just like, iron and manganese and all of those, deuterium is kind of a little bit like a metal, you could say, I think, because of the body has these complicated ways of dealing with it. And the body understands that it's important to reduce the amount of deuterium that's in the mitochondria. And I mentioned the mitochondria, those are the energy generating organelles in the cell. And the neurons and the muscle cells have a lot of mitochondria. And when their mitochondria get damaged, you get all these kinds of diseases, and neurodegenerative and muscular diseases that we see today can be tied to the mitochondria not working properly, and they will break when they have too much deuterium. So there's a very complicated set of enzymes that are very skilled at selecting hydrogen. If I have a molecule of glucose and it's got a deuterium there where I'm supposed to take a hydrogen off, I won't touch it. I'll throw that one away and go get another one. So that the ones that have the deuterium stay behind, and the enzyme is able to choose the one that has the hydrogen and then pass the hydrogen on to the mitochondria. It's really cool biochemistry that I find extremely fascinating. But when you start to realize the scope of it, you realize that it is very, very central to metabolism, to make sure that the mitochondria have low deuterium. And the enzymes that do that, many of them are suppressed by glyphosate.
And so here we are, getting overloaded in deuterium.
Yeah, there's too much deuterium in the mitochondria, and then the mitochondria, the ATPase pumps that make the ATP, they get broken. And then the mitochondria start releasing this reactive oxygen that damages the cell. And they also can't make as much ATP, so they become inefficient, and they become dangerous because they're releasing this reactive oxygen that causes harm and ends up eventually causing cancer.
Oh, my. Well, it's that time of the show, Dr. Seneff, when I get to ask you, what's your mission?
Well, certainly one mission is to get rid of glyphosate. I would love to see the manufacturing of plants shut down, and nobody even knows what glyphosate is anymore after a while because we're not using it anymore. And then I think more generally, not just glyphosate, but all the herbicides, all the insecticides, all the fungicides, I think they all need to be abandoned, and we need to go back to organic agriculture. I think if we could achieve that one goal, we would see a tremendous improvement in our health, and our children would be healthy. We wouldn't have this epidemic in autism that we're seeing. And I think a lot of things would straighten up, and the medical industry would have a lot less money because nobody would be getting sick. All these terrible diseases that are going up dramatically would start to go back down again if we were just always to eat organic food without any chemicals being used in the growing of those crops. I think that's number one in my book, the most important thing we should be doing. And I'm frustrated that, in all the political discussion that goes on these days, it's hardly ever even brought up as a topic.
It's
the government is not aware.
Actually kind of pushed aside, it sounds like, from when you told me of your experience of trying to bring it before
Exactly.
the government. Yeah, that's really sad. What does it look like if we get rid of all these things, that you're talking about, and we go back to the farming the way it used to be, where the cow makes the poo fixes the soil grows the crops, the person pulls the weeds? Don't we have an awfully large population to be able to feed them like that again?
Maybe not. And I think we might be able to use technology to help us out here. And in fact, I know some people who are working on really smart tractors that run on solar energy and that have, vision capabilities. You see all this computer science that's come about with the computers becoming very capable, with resources to be able to actually go and recognize the weeds and then to kill them, for example, with boiling water, something very safe. So they could actually go in there, see the weeds, kill the weeds, and do it all completely automatically. And maybe just a single person kind of making sure the robot didn't, get in trouble. But ideally, you could have these robotic tractors that could really do it, a lot of it, even without a person involved.
So we get a smart tractor.
Yeah, smart tractor, yes.
So did your background in computer science and stuff help you envision some of this?
Yeah, well, my computer science background, I think, has been really good training for the work that I'm doing now. It's kind of interesting because I think that I don't know how it came to be, but I think a computer scientist tends to be more interested in a puzzle. And so for me, biology is a giant puzzle, and I'm always wondering why. I always ask the question why when I'm doing the research. And of course, we do have a lot of computer science tools that help you to find the information you're looking for. that has been absolutely essential for me. It's been really wonderful. And I've made use of some of the large language models and the chatbots to help me. And you have to be careful because they can lie, but to help you get educated on the topics that you're studying, it's really accelerated the rate at which I can acquire the knowledge, then piece together the puzzle by always asking why, to understand why is metabolism doing what it does. And it does such interesting, bizarre things that you're like, this just doesn't make any sense. And then that always drives me nuts. I have to go figure it out. And that's really how I came upon deuterium, because when you look at metabolism, it's so puzzling that it's so complicated. It's much more complicated than you would think it needs to be. But
And you
once you
remove one element and you've got
yeah,
a complicated mess, right?
yeah, well, once you've got the deuterium idea in place, then all this complexity makes sense. And that's what I'm so excited.
Well, we are out of time in the entire show. I can't thank you enough, Dr. Seneff, for coming on the show and sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure.
Our guest this hour has been Dr. Stephanie Seneff, the author of Toxic Legacy: How the Weedkiller Glyphosate is Destroying Our Health and Our Environment. To find out more about Dr. Seneff, where you can find her book and all she has to offer, visit her website, stephanieseneff.net. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes, visit our website, www.missionevolution.org. But most importantly, please be sure to join us right here next time as this mission continues, bringing information, resources, and support to our evolving world.